Welcome, everybody, to Defending Our Children. Today, we have Jennisue Jessen, founder and CEO of Compass 31, a nonprofit organization fighting against human trafficking. Jennisue and her husband, KJ, founded Compass 31 in 2011. Compass 31 provides a holistic model of restoration to those exiting commercial sexual exploitation. I would like to add that this is a faith-based model. Jennisue served a 2-year term on the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. She is also the author of the book titled The Lucky One, a chilling true account of child sex trafficking and one survivor's journey from brutal captivity to the life of freedom. Jennisue, thank you for joining us today. Can you let me know if I missed anything, and please tell us how you got into the fight?
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. You didn't miss anything. My last name's Jessen, not Jensen, but that is often mispronounced. So if people are looking me up later, it's Jessen, Jessen. How I got into the battle, I'm so excited to share that with you. Most people, I think, tend to go through hard experiences and be captivated by them. And instead, I have been equipped by quite a bit of trauma. I was sold into the sex trade at the age of 4 in the Midwest in the US and endured 14 years of all that you might imagine associated with rape for profit until a failed suicide attempt at the age of 17. The day after that, I was able to find freedom. So those experiences have equipped me to enter into counter trafficking with a depth of insight and compassion that makes my work both empowering and effective.
Wow, I tell you, that's a lot to unpack. I've spoken to a lot of survivors, and there's a question I would like to ask you about that, if it's okay. And you can tell me, I don't feel like answering it. But I've met a lot of survivors when asked if you could change your life and do it all over again and avoid the trauma and be a different person, would you do it? Or would you, because you're a strong person today, do you look back and say, this has put me here for a reason, this has made me strong?
Gosh, what a great and impossible question. I used to hear people say if I wouldn't change a thing because it's made me who I am. And my first gut impulse is BS. I don't believe that to be true. I would choose the easy way out. And yet, each of the experiences that I have endured and survived have given me insights and courage, I think all by God's grace, to equip me to be where I am and who I am today. So, would I choose it again? No. Am I grateful to be on the other side of it? Absolutely. And I'm grateful for the lessons that I learned that helped me to have a dynamic impact in the counter trafficking movement.
Well, I appreciate the honest answer, because this information was offered to me by, I don't know, some time ago by a survivor. And I was intrigued by it because, not being in your position, I would have said, yeah, I will take the easy way out. And I've asked a lot of people, a lot of survivors this, and 80% of the time they say what you mentioned earlier about, yes, I'm glad I did what I did. But I think you giving a real honest answer, it's something, it's a tough place to be.
Absolutely. Not something I would choose, but I'm grateful for the skills that I now have.
Well, I am certainly glad that you have those skills, and we certainly need more people that do what you do, because in this space, aftercare, helping people get out in aftercare is so needed. There's a demand for it, and I find that there's shortcomings to that service. So let's talk about Compass 31.
Yeah, Compass 31 is an international nonprofit, 501c3 here in the US, but we work in 6 countries. We're currently in Thailand, Bangladesh, the Middle East, working also in Greece, the US, and on the border between Poland and Ukraine. And in each of those places, we are engaging in a couple of different aspects of our work. We focus on prevention, restoration, and leadership development. So we have a prevention program, a prevention tool. We've actually equipped national leaders in 43 countries to use. They're using that in high risk areas. In the other countries that I mentioned previously, we have restoration programs where we are working with men, women, boys, and girls that are coming out of a sexual exploitation and walking alongside them, empowering them to become all that they were meant to be before the trauma happened. And then the final piece of that is leadership development, which is our program participants. We provide scholarships and educational support to the highest level of education they desire. And so we've had law school graduates and individuals that have graduated with their master's degree in social work. We want them to pursue their highest. And so that's the overarching view of what we do. We started Compass 31 in 2011 in northern Thailand, where initially my husband and I provided foster care to teenage mama baby sets. So teenage girls who were pregnant or had babies as a result of their sexual exploitation came out of the red light district and into our home, and we raised them as our own. And that was the very beginning, baby beginnings of Compass 31 in 2011.
Did you find that when you brought in these young ladies that were having kids, did you find that once they bore their children, were they trying to go back into the prior life, or did you have them long enough that you were able to help them steer away from that?
Yeah, by some miracle of God's grace, actually, our recidivism rate is less than 8% so far. So that means of the participants that come into our program, 92% so far have stayed free and go on to lead really dynamic lives of purpose and impact. And 8% have gone back into sexual exploitation for at least a period of time. But that statistic is really upside down from what we see across the board in counter-trafficking organizations. And in part, it's because I believe in the autonomy and the power of the survivor, that they have to choose and they have to want. And we identify their strengths and equip them to use those in a purposeful and healthy way. So, yeah, it's been highly effective thus far.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. I have a buddy of mine who he does prison ministry with his church, and his success rate is 3% of their church.
Yeah.
And he told me this because he was brokenhearted about, he failed in his mind with one person that went back into prison. And I asked him, well, what is y'all success rate? And he said 3%. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, why do you do it? I mean, it's crazy. So the fact that you have 92% success is incredible. Listen,
Yeah.
we are going to stop for a commercial break and we'll be back with Jennisue Jessen. Welcome back to Defending Our Children. We have a guest, Jennisue Jessen, and she was just discussing their success rate in their program with Compass 31. Tell us more about what else you guys offer with your program.
Yeah, so our restoration program, we call it a holistic model. The participants that come into our program that are under the age of 18 are plugged into a foster care sort of model. So we typically have 4 young survivors paired to a woman or a parent set, raising them together. And within this model, a small family model, they start learning to use all the relational skills that kept them alive, all their survival strategies, to use them in healthy ways, to build relationships, to get an education, get caught up on their education, we provide access to mental health counseling, physical health, hospital, testing for diseases, obviously prenatal care, postpartum care, should they be pregnant and decide to carry that child. So the whole model works together. And while our organization is, we don't ever proselytize, we offer services to anyone and everyone, we are motivated by our faith, by the love of Christ. And I think that is really the key and strategic difference in what makes our model successful versus not, is for us, our faith being the central piece of it, keeps all of us serving in the work healthy, keeps us from burning out, keeps us fulfilled and satisfied in the work, but also keeps the perspective, it's not my job to save anyone. It's not my job to heal anyone. It's not my job to change anyone, change their behavior, change their mind. It's not my job to redeem anyone. It's my job to love them, to see them as priceless, as this valuable human being. And in loving them, if my job is only to love God and love others, then I can do that all day long, every day. And I don't burn out because I'm not trying to do these other jobs by saving and protecting and changing and redeeming. Those are all above my pay grade, which is why I think our model is successful.
Jenny, that is very interesting, and I'll tell you why. Because my mother, who is probably the wisest person on this planet in my mind, she is a very well dialed in spiritual person. She's kind of like the den mother for our org. And sometimes I go to her with a heavy heart with what we're dealing with. And, it's funny because I tell her, well, I'm praying for them to quit doing what they're doing. And she's like, wait a minute, you need to pray for them to receive the information that they need to listen to what they're supposed to be doing. That everybody has the tools in front of them to move forward in life. You just got to make the decision to do it. You can't make somebody stop doing what they're doing or do what you want them to do. But what you can do is pray for them to get that information and to listen. So when you say that, I find it very fascinating because I hear the words resonating for what my mom has to say. So that's very fascinating to me. And I feel like when you talk about those things, it's one of my struggles in my spirituality, doing that. And I do witness people in your space that they absorb all that negative energy and it's harmful to them.
It is. It can be devastating. Like secondary trauma or vicarious trauma can be devastating. But my view of the people that we work with, I call them participants because they choose to participate. I don't define them as victims or rarely even as survivors because that's not their identity. That's something that's happened to them. But I don't view them as broken. I think they are these fierce, resilient, miraculous human beings. And when we can identify those strengths and call those strengths up and out, they're not broken. They have this capacity to accomplish things that are unimaginable for many people because they've done it year after year, day after day, hour after hour. They've faced unthinkable things and done what they had to do to survive and come to the other side of it. So when we can harness that power, these participants, they go on to be world changers. And none of us are absorbing each other's trauma. Instead, this empowerment is contagious. We just drive each other further up and further on.
Wow, that's incredible. So in essence, and let me see if I'm understanding this. I like to sometimes repeat what people are saying. Because a participant, which I love that term, that actually I'm going to be thinking about that for who knows how long, a participant who is executing tasks that are ugly every single day for long periods of time. If you can endure that, then if they agree to take a different path, you can show them like, oh, well, doing this, you've got the physical and mental acuity to do that because it's a lot easier than what you had been enduring.
Yeah, baby, there's nothing you can't do.
Wow.
That's what I tell the girls and boys that are on our program. Yeah, baby, like you've proved it. There's nothing you can't do.
Wow.
Let's use these skills in a way that is helpful instead of harmful.
Wow. That is wonderful. What is the ratio of boys versus girls that you deal with in Thailand?
Right now, we have 40 some odd participants in spread across all the countries that we're working, and fewer than 10% of them are boys.
Do you think that number is low, or do you think that that number is, do you think that it's harder to reach the boys? Because what we believe is that there's more harm happening, not necessarily more than girls, but there's more harm to boys than what is reported or what is established.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I really don't have concrete data. In sexual exploitation, proportionately more females are exploited than males. However, there are far fewer services available to males that have been exploited or are being exploited. So I think proportionately, we're not too far off. It's more, I think, in sexual exploitation, 2/3 are female and 1/3 are male. It's just the candidates, the participants that have been brought into our program, we don't say yes or no because they're male or female or what their identity is. We accept any and all that are choosing freedom. They choose. If they choose they want to a different path, then they are a candidate for our program.
What's interesting is our founder, he shared with me, and he was a Navy SEAL, he was in the Marines, a Navy SEAL sniper, and he's met men that were, the biggest the man's man, guys that have fought in many actionable wars, and yet they've shared with him, like they've taken him aside and shared their story. And he would ask him, well, why, what'd you do about it? Why didn't you talk about it? And they would say, well, we weren't supposed to talk about it.
Right.
We're badasses, for lack of a better word. And
Right.
so he was surprised that in hearing this, he hears the story a lot and he shares it with me when that happens. So that's
Yeah.
why I was kind of curious in what your perception of that was as well.
Yeah. I think currently the statistic is 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 4 boys will be sexually assaulted by the time they reach the age of 18. And that is definitely an entry point into exploitation.
Wow, that's horrible. Well, listen, we're going to stop for a commercial break and we'll be back with Jennisue Jessen with on defending our children. Welcome back to Defending Our Children. We're here with our guest, Jennisue Jessen. She was just talking about the work that they're doing with Compass 31 in Thailand. Jenny, let me ask you this. How did you find your way to Thailand, of all places?
Yeah, we actually were working with an organization that was equipping national leaders to be church planters. And so we were working with Chinese nationals coming out of China into Thailand and equipping them. And while we were living and working in Thailand, every Friday night, I couldn't go on a date with my husband without encountering little kids on dates with older men who were sexually exploiting them. And so we had lived in Thailand for about 6 months when I was just compelled by my own story and the needs all around me and the love of Christ to enter in to what was happening in a way that might make a change.
Wow, that must have been an eye-opening experience. Let me ask you this. Does technology play any sort of a role over there? Do you see technology, as we see technology playing a big role in trafficking here in the States? Do you see it there impacting?
Technology does play a role in exploitation, both here in the US and globally. Although I would say probably the way that it works out in much of Southeast Asia is how it is driven or creates tourism. So men or individuals that are interested in exploiting children find ways to come into a country and where to go and what bars to visit and what children or young adults are available for exploitation. They find all of that through discussion groups, discussion boards, social media. And so the exploitation is fueled and facilitated, I would say, by technology, but perhaps in a different way than we see in the US, where perpetrators are, grooming kids online through social media or direct messaging them while they're at school. So yes, but differently.
How does the government there feel about in the countries you're working in? How do they feel about what you see, what you're with trafficking of kids?
That is a tricky question and not one that I can freely answer and continue to work.
Okay. Well, that I understand. I understand.
I I would say this. I can say this freely, and that is in every country where I work and in every group that I collaborate with, whether it's law enforcement, social workers, foster care, religious community, nonprofit organizations, government officials, within all of those groups and sectors, there are some really good, noble, passionate, justice driven people. And within all of those sectors, from government to down to the personal individual, law enforcement, churches, within all of those sectors, there are also individuals that are wholly corrupt and bent on destruction.
Wow.
And that is true globally and across every socioeconomic status and every career path.
Very well put. I believe, and I've been, saying this for some time now, that trafficking of children is the currency, and that there are positions that policymakers they fit. There's four positions that they fit with that currency, and that is A, they're ignoring it, B, they're benefiting from it, C, they're participating, or D, they're being leveraged. And if you've ever had a discussion in the political realm, we've all had those policymakers at any level that represented themselves in their position as being X. And then for some strange reason, out of the blue, they do a 180 and you're scratching your head going, why does this happen? Every election cycle since Reagan, because that was the first president I voted for, I've had this discussion. I finally figured out, I think this is what the cause of it is. And you're right. And even in the States, on each level, we run into a lot of folks that are noble and they're what we call right fighters. That's our term. We put you in that category of being a right fighter because these are our kids. And there is no reason, in the animal kingdom, we're the only ones that sacrifice our kids. It makes absolutely no sense. And I grew up that you didn't do that. So anyway, I appreciate you answering that as best as you possibly can. One other thing, on your website, you have a tool called the Priceless Cube. Do you want to talk about that?
I do. That is one of the things I'm really, really excited about. We were able to create this tool called Priceless Cube. It's this handy dandy little block. It folds 7 different ways, and each panel uses pictures to tell about both the risks and the realities of human trafficking. And it's this tool we were able to create. We collaborated with the International Justice Mission and Compassion International and E3 Partners. So we collaborated with all 3 of them to create this tool. And it's this tool that we've been able to use to equip leaders in 43 countries who are now using it in at-risk border regions, places of great vulnerability, and they're teaching the community leaders and the families and the children within the communities what traffickers are doing, what the strategy is, how they are, what the deception is, how to know the difference between someone who's safe and someone who isn't, how to know who's safe with a job opportunity. So much of trafficking is happening through either fraud or coercion. Our typical idea is kind of, the Hollywood blockbuster, kick down the door, taken kind of movie. And force does happen, but more often than not, it's fraud or coercion. And so we use this tool because it's image based. The nationals can translate it into their own language because it's picture based and it's this block that folds. It's very playful and engaging. So it makes a challenging conversation easy to have. And we're seeing it being used in really highly impactful ways. So between the border of India and Bangladesh, at least 3,000 people a month are hearing this message about the strategies traffickers are using, the ability to know the difference between what's safe and not, and people are being prevented from being trafficked because of that.
Wow, that's incredible. I'd like to maybe unwrap that a little bit on our next segment. But
Yeah.
what I would like you to do is this time share with our viewer or with our listeners how you can be found, how you can be supported, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So our website is www.compass31.com. And so you can find us there. That's our primary go-to. We are also on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, both at Compass 31. And then you can find me directly on LinkedIn. I'm Jennisue Jessen, Jessen. So find me any of those places, send me a DM, and let's see how we can change the world together.
And I just want to point out that you are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So you do take donations to help further your cause.
Absolutely. Everything that we do is funded through the gifts and donations of friends, family, businesses, and churches.
Well, thank you very much, folks. And we'll be right back with the second half of our show of Defending Our Children. Welcome back, everybody, to Defending Our Children. We are back with Jennisue Jessen, founder and CEO of Compass 31. We've been having a great discussion regarding human trafficking and what an incredible and evil enterprise all around the world that this is. Jenny, I wanted to ask more about the priceless cube. You were really starting to unpack that. And so I was imagining, because I did review the video and I was looking at the product, that it is an image-based product. How long does it take to train somebody to use the tool?
Yeah, it's actually super simple. We generally, when we're invited to train nationals or a new group or law enforcement, we have about a 3-hour session to train them all the nuances of the stories and also give them adequate practice time. But the tool itself is so simple. It comes with an instruction sheet, and in 10 minutes, you can take it out of the box and be sharing the risks and realities of trafficking. Part of the reason we spend so long, up to 3 hours, training is because we really dial in on the story of trafficking in that region. For example, if in Houston, people are being trafficked because they're being groomed online, we're going to cater the story to what those traffickers, how they're engaging with the kids, what are the stories they're telling. If we're sharing it in a village in Ethiopia and the vast majority of girls are being trafficked to the Middle East and think they're going to work in hotels or in restaurants, but in fact are being sold into brothels, we narrow down, we refine the story to that locale so that it can be most effectively transmitted or communicated to that area to protect them most effectively.
How long did it take you to develop this product? It seems to me, I mean, for such a simple device, and its versatility is endless.
The versatility is endless, and again, it's image based. So we worked really hard to be very inclusive without ostracizing any particular community. So when we first started field testing in different countries and different places, some people said, well, can you make it look more Vietnamese? Or can you make it look more Ethiopian? Or can you make it look more American? And our answer to that was, well, of American, what American do we want to look like? Like, are we going to be a brown person, a white person, what ethnicity? And the same is true globally. If it's going to be more Ethiopian, well, which of the 64 people groups is that going to look like? And so we made it in such a way that people would see some aspect of themselves, but it not be that trafficking only happens in Vietnam or trafficking only happens in Houston. Really, it's a global problem driven by greed and lust. And so the tool to develop was based on a couple of other cubes that worked the same way. Coming up with the 7 stories or the 7 panels and images took about a year to really refine and develop and field test until we came up with a product that we were really excited about.
Wow, that is incredible. And it's clever. I couldn't imagine the process of doing that. It must have been pretty exhilarating once you arrived at the final solution, like, hey, I can put this and yeah, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
it was really a fun process, and it still gives me goosebumps. I think currently on our website we have complete translations in 24 languages with several other languages in process. And every time I get to see the handout in a new language, I get all quivery and teary-eyed, and like a language I've never heard, a language I don't know how to speak. And here it is, the same message being propagated and protecting individuals that I'll never meet.
So whenever you introduce a new language, do you have to solicit a volunteer or somebody to incorporate the training in those regions?
Absolutely. Yeah. All of our work outside of the US is national driven. That means in Thailand, all of our staff and the people working are Thai. And that is the way that we work in all of our countries. So we work with somebody obviously that knows English so that we can train and equip them. And then we work side by side as they translate it. The translations aren't necessarily word for word, they're contextualized to the culture and the people in a way that is most understandable to the individuals they're speaking to.
How effective are the recipients of this, not the training itself, but the people that you're, I hate to use the word preach, but you're communicating with?
Yeah, it is both inspiring and heartbreaking. I know one of my first trips to Ethiopia when we were doing Priceless Cube back in 2013, I was sharing it in a community where every single household had at least one member that had been trafficked. And for the most part, they were believing that their girls, their children, had gone to a job in the Middle East and but hadn't heard from them for multiple years, 2, 3, 4 years. And when I finished sharing the Priceless Cube in one group of about 30 individuals, I asked if there was any questions at the end, and these 2 women stood up in the back and said, "Yeah, how do we get our sisters back?" And so it was crushing to know that they understood the story. Oh my gosh, this is what's happened. And now we know we can't send anybody else, but also the burden and grief of knowing that where they were, where they ended up, and to encourage those individuals that globally there are what do you call them, right fighters. There are people that are noble and fierce who are seeking out, looking for, intervening in situations where people have been trafficked, and that I would pray for them and I would make what connections I could. My personal faith, my personal belief is that God never leaves us or forsakes us. So wherever their sisters were, God was with them and could provide comfort beyond what we could imagine. But that's my personal faith, and that's how I navigate the brutality and the reality of what trafficking looks like and how it's happening.
Wow. So at that moment in receiving this training, they realized that their loved ones had been off in another country. They suspected they were working a job of some sort. but they
Right.
realized that's not what was reality. And you witnessed that aha moment for those. Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah. And we watched on that trip, we worked in 120 homes, and we saw more than 30 of them tear up contracts they were fraudulent contracts. They were preparing to send their girl to the Middle East, and we saw them tear up the contracts and refuse to send their kids.
Wow, that's great. That's actually great to hear. How many of these cubes have you sold?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know.
Just a wild guess. Just a wild guess if you could think. But
Somewhere probably around 8,000, nine
wow,
thousand.
wow. What an incredible tool.
Yeah.
What an incredible tool. I just couldn't imagine sitting there witnessing the training and then realizing I've got a contract in my hand for my child to go overseas. And I mean, that must have been a great aha moment. And the person sitting next to you is, crying because they just realized what happened to their child. So you've
Yeah.
got two different versions of what you've witnessed in essence, the
Yeah.
good and bad.
I do have, there's a blog post on my website on www.compass31.com called Ethiopia from the Heart that details that story.
I'll have to check that out. Now, folks, we are going to stop for a commercial break and we'll be right back with Defending Our Children. Welcome back to Defending Our Children. We are talking to our guest, Jennisue Jessen, and we are talking about Compass 31 and her work overseas in Thailand. And additionally to that, she actually authored a book called The Lucky One, which, by the way, has a 4.5-star rating on Amazon. So how did you come about writing this book?
Yeah, writing the book was a challenging endeavor. It took me a few years to write. The thing is, it's based on my own personal story, my own journey, and my journey was a hard one to live. It's a hard one to write, and it's a hard one to read. And so it took quite a bit of time and healing for me to be able to sit down and document just a few of the key events that happened over the course of my childhood. And with each of those events, I go into depth about how I feel like Jesus entered into those circumstances, how he met me in the darkness, and how he redeemed each of those situations to equip me for what I'm doing now. But yeah, it was a long, drawn out process. And one of the challenges was both in writing the book and in my work was I feel like God rescued me from the dark. And then he had the audacity to ask me to step back into it. And I'm human. I'm made of flesh. I did not go easily. That's just authentic. I didn't go easily.
Well, I too find myself at odds with God on our journey and what we're doing.
Uh-huh.
And I tell people all the time I'm running in the woods, and they were like, "Well, how do you pray to God?" I said, "I don't really pray to God. I talk to him, and
Right.
sometimes I give him a piece of my mind." And
Yes.
there have been times when I've been laying flat on my back. I can't tell you how I ended up on my back, but it's because he wanted me to listen, look up and listen. So I do, probably on a significantly smaller scale, understand what you're talking about. How long did it take you to write the book?
Yeah, just a nerd alert. I am goal oriented, and I figured out the word count for an average length book and did the math. If I wrote 500 words a day in 120 days, I could complete my book. And so I made a little check box paper. And every day I committed I would write 500 words, 500 words, 500 words. And I would know how many days left I had. And if by chance I wrote 1,500 words, I got to mark off 3 boxes. And if I wrote 2,000, I wrote off 4 boxes. But at a minimum, I decided I would write 500 a day. And so I did. When I finally committed to writing the book, I wrote it from end to end in 4 months, in 120 days.
Did you produce an outline of some sort?
I did start with, I felt like prayerfully, as I was wrestling with God about whether I could or would tell the story, I felt like He gave me a very clear outline of which events were important. Like I said in the beginning, I endured 14 years rape for profit, and it would be gratuitous to go into detail about all the blood, sweat, and tears of each of those events. But there were certain events that were pivotal, both in the trauma I endured and how that was redeemed, that I felt like the outline covered that journey in a way that was sufficient to give readers understanding into what I endured, but also understanding into the wild depth of grace that is available to us.
Wow, that is so fascinating. I've talked to so many people that have written books, and they did it completely different than what you just described. It sounds
Yeah,
like to me, you just said, I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm going to write my story. I'm going to do this many words a day and it minimally. And then when you got done, you were done, which actually is interesting because there was probably a little definity going on there because you got to get through it as quickly as possible. And it probably wasn't a pleasant process to do.
right. I did write, beginning to end, but because I had the outline every morning when I came to my computer for my 500 words, and 500 words isn't a lot. Like it's just a couple of paragraphs. It's not like hours of work. But every day when I came to my computer, I could look at the outline and pick wherever I felt the capacity that I could write that day. So I didn't write it like page 1 to page 117 or whatever. I Every day my 500 words would be plugged into wherever I was emotionally, physically, spiritually able to enter in.
If I were to counsel somebody and their daughter or son, I would say I'd like them to read this book just to educate them. Is there like an age limit that you would say, hey, if they're under this, or is there some sort of an age limit you would recommend?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. It is grown up content. It is a hard, hard story. I have had several families with kids as young as 12 that their kids have experienced some form of exploitation online or in person or sexual abuse. And at that age, reading with a loving parent or adult also reading, I've had that age find it really healing, but it comes with a big warning. A parent should read it first, absolutely. And a lot of adults can't get through it. And my own children, I have 3 of my own children, all adults, and my own children have not read it, but my son-in-law and daughter-in-law both have read it. So I think it just depends on where someone is in their journey. If a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old has experienced sexual violence, they'll get it. They'll understand it. Younger than that, I don't think it would be of interest to them. I don't know that they would be ready emotionally to enter into someone else's trauma when theirs is still so tender and fresh.
That's interesting. I couldn't imagine reading a book about my mother. I kind of understand your kid's position on that,
Right.
certainly.
They know me, they love me, they know enough of the story to know what the history is without the detail. And between me and them, it's lovely and it's okay. They don't ever have to read it.
So I'm assuming then your experiences probably heighten your senses on being a mother and raising your kids. Is there anything you like to share about that as a mother?
I do feel like one of the real gifts of the trauma I've endured, which is true for many people who have experienced exploitation, is we have an uncanny capacity to understand people's motives and perceive safe and dangerous situations. And it's an intuitive, it's a gut, it's almost a quantum physics level vibration of somebody who's trustworthy and somebody who's not trustworthy. And I think that's probably one of the greatest assets that comes from growing up in a dangerous environment is to stay alive, you have to know who's safe and who isn't, and what you have to do to stay safe. So, yeah, I think it's a great skill to have as a mama.
Good information to hear. Folks, we are going to take a commercial break and we will be back with Jennisue Jessen on defending our children. Welcome back to Defending Our Children. This is the last segment that we have with Jennisue Jessen of Compass 31. And she was telling us her story about the book that she wrote. And she was also talking about being a mother. And so I believe she has some information that she can share with being a parent and how to arm our children and other parents to make their kids safe.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I am most passionate about as a mama. I work, full time on the restoration side with individuals that have experienced exploitation. But how much more hopeful is it, instead of picking up the pieces, to prevent a child from ever being exploited? And so I love to equip parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, teachers, to proactively protect their kids that are in their lives from being exploited. Here in the US, exploitation is just growing at an exponential rate. Kids are being groomed online through social media, different platforms. And so I have 5 quick tips that I really encourage parents to take note of so that they can prevent their children from being exploited. The very first one is to set a high standard of love within your own home, because the way that you define and express love will shape your children's self image, their confidence, and their opinions of what an intimate relationship looks like. So, helping them distinguish between real love and empty promises is imperative. The second thing that I feel like is really important is to talk to your children about sexual abuse. According to the Department of Justice, someone in the US is sexually assaulted every 2 minutes. 29% of those are between the ages of 12 and 17. So parents need to let their kids know that they can talk to you if anyone ever has or ever does hurt them. And when you bring up the conversation, it's important to not assume that they've never been assaulted before, because they may have and have never had the opportunity or felt strong enough or capable of sharing that. The third thing is to talk to your children about sex trafficking. So discuss ways children and teens are targeted. Let them know that traffickers specifically try to woo kids with promises of gifts and a better life, love, attention, nice things, trips. Let them know that traffickers can be male or female. Let them know that traffickers can even be classmates, because often traffickers are now using kids to recruit other kids. Fourth thing would be talk to your children about the dangers of social media. It's important to provide practical safety tips, like don't share personal information on the internet, don't accept Facebook requests from unknown people, never, ever, ever. Did I say never, ever, ever? Share naked photos of yourself with anyone. And tell a parent or trusted adult if you ever feel threatened or uncomfortable online. There's so many dangers, from bullying to sexual exploitation, that are happening. And it's often happening like kids are on the couch and mom's in the kitchen making dinner, and really a pedophile is having a conversation with your 12-year-old daughter 10 feet away from you, and you don't know it. You wouldn't invite a pedophile over for dinner, and yet they're often sitting at your kitchen table on your kid's phone. So be aware of the dangers of social media. And fifth and finally is to pay attention to your kids. Pay attention. So much of our lives, we are so busy these days. We are rushing from here to there to get the next thing done, to soccer practice, to dinner, to bed, to homework, to job. Well, we're scrolling through our own phones and we're not noticing what's happening right in front of us. So pay attention to your children, if they're withdrawing, if their behavior has changed, if their grades have changed, if their friends have changed, if they are starting to isolate themselves, If they suddenly have new clothes, new makeup, new cell phones, new toys, how did they get these things? It's really great to have a contract or a collaboration, a discussion with your kid that you're monitoring their social media accounts, not to keep them from having fun, but or to censor anything or to even invade their privacy, but to make sure that you can protect them or you can work with them to protect themselves from any threat that may be coming to them online. So, those are my 5 major tips for parents to prevent their children from being trafficked.
That was well said. Good information. One thing you should probably consider doing is a translator, because I look at my kids' social media stuff and I'm like, what does that mean? I'm constantly having to Google words, something as simple as like sus. And
Right,
my daughter's like, that's suspicious. I'm like, will it kill you to say 3 syllables?
right.
Drives
It's
me nuts.
it's suspect, sus. Yeah. I on a fairly regular basis in emails that I send out to our my list, our supporters, our team, is I include like an urban dictionary. Like, here's what these LOL means, what these little phrases mean, so that parents can be aware of the current dialect. And also often jokingly, like, yeah, if you're over 30, don't say this, you won't look cool, but this is what it.
Human trafficking event in Houston, Texas. And what was surprising was Homeland Security had done a study. Was it Homeland, I think, or was it the Department? It was may have been the Department of Labor 8 years ago in San Diego. And the numbers were, they had discovered a number of kids. I want to say 8,000 comes to mind, that were being trafficked. They were going to school during the day. They were after school going and operating
Mhm.
as sex slaves, and then going home and having dinner with their family and doing their homework.
Yeah.
And this information was studied back that far back, but nothing was ever done about it, which I find very surprising.
Yeah, that is one little known misunderstanding within the counter trafficking movement, is the vast majority of minor children that are being sexually exploited are living in homes and going to school. They're going to school. 67% of them will encounter a healthcare professional over the course of their exploitation. I lived at home and went to school, and school was my safe place. That's where I thrived, because it was so different than what was happening outside of school.
You
And
had you had contrast.
right,
Good was school, bad was not school.
right. And so the vast majority of sexually exploited kids are in our neighborhoods. They're in our schools. If you have a birthday party, your kid, your 12-year-old has a slumber party and there's 12 kids, you can estimate at least 4 of them have been or will be sexually assaulted before they turn 18. So how do we see these kids and let them know that they're valuable, that their life has purpose, that they're known, that they're loved?
Wow, that is just crazy. I have 4 sisters, and so my sisters, they remind me all the time about what to look out for, and
Right.
I'm grateful for them. Well, listen, we have a little bit of time left. I'd like you to share with us how we can find you, how people can support you, support your cause.
Yeah. So thank you for that. My organization is called Compass 31. We're at www.compass31.com. You can find us there. Our work is entirely 100% donation based, driven by gifts from friends and family and partners. And you can also find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram at Compass 31, and you can find me directly on LinkedIn, Jennisue Jessen, Jessen. So connect any of those places. Let's change the world together.
Well, Jenny, I really appreciate you coming on our show. I welcome all to support her as best they can. Thank you for joining us on Defending Our Children.